Let's pick up in verse 18 of James chapter 2. Some will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe that there is one God, you do well. Even the demons believe and tremble. But do you want to know, O foolish man, that faith without works is dead? It's not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up Isaac his son on the altar? Do you see that faith was working together with his works, and by works of faith was made perfect? And the scripture was fulfilled which says, Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness. And he was called a friend of God. You see then that a man is justified by works and not by faith only. Likewise, was not Rahab the harlot also justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out another way? For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. Last week we looked at Abraham and the sacrifice that he made of Isaac. And we considered that passage there, that narrative of Abraham doing that from the observation point of being obedient, of doing the things that God wants us to. But there's that aspect of Abraham being made righteous because of his faith. That faithful act specifically. We're going to take that a step further and look at some of those faithful acts in that of Rahab. Now let's get it off the table here, because even in some of the commentaries that are more recent, I've seen them try to make Rahab as just sort of a housekeeper. Someone who had maybe a motel in town. But she was a prostitute. More specifically, the word there that's being used is often referred to as an idolatress. Okay, maybe a chief idolatress. And even all the way up until Jesus was on earth, in Corinth specifically, when Paul was writing there even. Idolatry, idol worship often went hand in hand with fornication with prostitutes at the temple. That was worship. And so let's not try to church up Rahab here as we get ready to look at who she was and what it was that she did that made her righteous. Because in this passage of Scripture here, we see Rahab and Abraham being compared in a positive light. The work that Abraham did was accounted to him for righteousness. And the same is said of Rahab. So what quality was it for Abraham? It's a little easier to see. We know a lot more about Abraham. We see him time and time again showing his faith, sometimes struggling with that faith. But we see him being faithful to God time and time again in that culminating event of sacrificing Isaac. Rahab, we don't know as much. I know we've studied her a little bit when we looked at Jesus' family tree, and we looked at specifically some of those that are on it that are less than reputable, have a less than reputable character, and she's one of them. She's one of only a few women that are mentioned in Jesus' family tree in Matthew. She's not even an Israelite. She's a Canaanite. And the Canaanites were checked off for destruction. Israel was going in to destroy them. Because God tells Abraham, hey, in 400 years, your people are going to come back. The children that you are going to have are going to come back and claim this land. Not yet, because the iniquity of the Amorites, Canaanites, is not yet complete. And in that, we see God's grace. That's not what this lesson's about, but we see God's grace there. And what's more, I believe I mentioned last week, is that as Isaac is being sacrificed, there's still Shem that got off the ark with Noah still living. And so as we see Rahab here, it's not that she is so far removed in time from people like Abraham, people like Isaac, people like Noah and his sons. And so as these two spies come in to spy out the land, as Joshua has instructed them to go in and check out specifically this city, they come into her house. They come into her residence as they start to be hunted. And we see in Joshua chapter 2, we meet her for the first time in her profession of faith. She says in verse 8, she came up to the roof where they were, and she hid them up there and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you the land, that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. We've looked at this before. We've considered her profession of faith before. She heard what's going on. They see the size of the Israelite army. Across the river, they're still on the other side of the Jordan. And she says, hey, we're all pretty scared right now. We know y'all are coming, and we're worried. Even we've got this big wall, we're worried. For we have heard, and now she tells why, how the Lord has dried up the water of the Red Sea. For when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of the Jordan, whom you utterly destroyed, as soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted. Neither did there remain any more courage in anyone because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. That's a very similar profession of faith that a Christian makes today. The scene leading up to this, we see this woman who is not a moral person when it comes to her lifestyle, but she's really a product of her community. She's a product of her society. She's a product of her upbringing. And so when these two spies come in to spy out the land and they come to her, she could have very easily, very simply given them over. When you look there at the first part of this chapter, I was just thinking, just as I was just reviewing this, kind of sprang to my mind there that they came to the house of Rahab in verse 1 at the end there, and verse 2, it was told to the king of Jericho, saying, behold, men have come here tonight from the children of Israel to search out the country. So the king sent to Rahab, saying, it wasn't that this decree went out in the whole city, hey, there's some spies here. If you've got them, give them up. The king of this little city-state knows Rahab specifically. So I would say that's probably a clear indication that she was someone that was important. Most likely religiously, but certainly in what she did as a living. People knew her. The king knew her reputation, and knew some people had shown up there. And Rahab makes this kind of a statement. She's willing to put it all on the line as these men come and ask her, hey, what'd you do with those guys? Where are they? Bring them out. They're here to kill us all. She knew everybody was worried in the city. She knew what they were there for. And her own countrymen are saying, we know they're there. We know they came to you. Where are they? Well, they're not here. They've already left. But if you hurry, I bet you can catch them. Was it that lie that Rahab told that made her righteous? No. No, I can't say that that's what made her righteous. It was the deed, though, of protecting God's people. It was the profession of faith. In James there, he's talking. He says there that Rahab, the harlot, also justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out another way. It wasn't what she told the men that came to look for her. It wasn't that she lied. It's a lie, is a lie, is a lie. Now, there's some things I could, lawyer this up and make it seem like she said something that she didn't really say, but we just read what she said to them. You can read it there in Joshua chapter 2, exactly what she said to them. She knew where they were. At the very least, she definitely misled them. Now, I can't fault her. I can't fault her for doing that. But what she was made righteous for was because of what she did for them. Instead of sending them out the front door, she gave them another way out. I mean, there's a lesson right there that God's going to provide a way of escape. We're not going to be tempted beyond what we can bear. There will always be a way. This section in James chapter 2 that we looked at. And the reason I wanted to go back to look at Rahab's story there, of what she did specifically. And we're going to talk more about this next week, because there's more that we can glean from this example of the church and what Christ's blood does for the church and where we need to be in order to ensure our salvation. But as Rahab's righteous deeds, what she did was accounted to her as righteous. We see this good work that she did. James here in chapter 2 is painting this picture, and I've seen it described as a rowboat. And you've only got one paddle, faith. You're not going to get anywhere with that one paddle. You row in a circle. Of course, I mean, well, never mind. You should use the paddle on the other side of the boat, but that's not the boat. The boat's too big to do that. You can only row on one side for whatever reason. And maybe the Vikings, they only have one paddle on one side. Yeah. But it's the faith and the works that makes it go forward. But this is a confusing passage to some. It's a confusing passage because there's other passages in the New Testament that talks about how faith is what saves, not works of the law, as Romans specifically says. There's nothing that we can do to earn our salvation. Or Ephesians chapter 2, that it's grace that saves us, not by any works that we can do. And then that said, it seems it's not talking about works of the law, as Romans specifically is talking about, but it's talking about doing something good to earn salvation. James is not talking about earning salvation by any stretch. In fact, it's works that is a natural progression of one who has faith in God. Abraham would have never done what he did if he did not have faith in God. Would have never done it. He had faith in God before he acted. And that is very apparent on the mountain there, where he's about to sacrifice Isaac, as he's going up to it. And we notice specifically as he tells the servants, hey, we're going to go and worship God, we're going to make sacrifice, we're coming back. We are coming back. Abraham had faith before he acted. Rahab had faith before she acted. She professed that faith. And then she tied the red scarlet ribbon out her window, and she stayed where she was when the chaos of battle came. See, it wasn't just a one-time profession of faith. It was an action that continued to happen. It was an active obedience that continued to take place through the coming days and really the coming weeks. And we'll look more at that next week. But it wasn't just this one-time deal where she hid the spies and now she's saved and she can go about doing whatever she wants to. It was one that she continued to make on a daily basis as the approaching army of Israel came, and they're marching around marching around the city for 6 days, and then on that seventh day they march around this battle cry, and her house is on the wall, and that's the thing that's coming down. And she stayed in the house. That act of faith made her righteous. Now, what was it though? What was it that saved her? Was it the fact that she stayed in the house? Well, there was other people that stayed in their house and they died. Was it the fact that she tied the ribbon on her window? Well, it was grace that saved her, right? It was grace. saved her because of her faith. Now, when you think about it, it's like, well, that's kind of tomato. Who says tomato anyway? But it's this, when you think about it, it's like, well, it is kind of the same thing. And as we've been studying over at Chafee Road on Wednesday night, Romans, it was one of the commentaries I was reading about faith and being saved by faith. And it's almost like this idea of a drowning person that is rescued, plucked from the water by the Coast Guard. You know, the storm's blazing, and you got that helicopter with the rope on it and the basket, and the guys wearing scuba gear, and they get you out of the water, and you get to the shore, and you're like, yeah, all right, I just saved myself. And you didn't, clown. The Coast Guard did. You would have drowned. You'd save yourself. It's ridiculous to boast like I saved myself. Rahab didn't save herself any more than Abraham brought his son Isaac back from the dead. Both of those happened because of the grace of God. The house that Rahab lived in, as the walls crumbled, did not crumble because Israel walked around the walls and shouted. And her house didn't standing up because it was a solid construction and the rest of the walls weren't. She was saved because of grace. Now, as we look at the rest of chapter 2 in James, what are some of those works that we do? What are some of those things that we're supposed to be doing as Christians? Well, he gives some specific examples there. Some examples that more often than not hit home. He talks there in the beginning there in verse 15. Brothers, sisters, naked and destitute of daily food. And you say, well, depart, be warmed and filled. I'll say a prayer for you, brother. I'll pray that things get better for you, sister. But you don't do anything about it. Did you really do anything? And that's not to say that prayer is pointless. That's not what his point is here. His point is here, we're supposed to be doing something as Christians. That's our job. We're not doing good works to build this stairway. It's doing good works because we're Christians. And that's what we are made to do. Ephesians chapter 2. We are supposed to be doing these things. Faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. Faith is dead without good works. He says there in verse 18, but some will say, you have faith, and I have works. Show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. That's a logical argument right there, isn't it? How can we talk about Rahab being faithful if we can't point to what she did to display her faith? Same with Abraham. How could we show Abraham as this example of faith? How do we know he's faithful if he did not show faithful works? How can a Christian be faithful if we're not doing faithful things? He gives a pretty extreme example there too. You believe there's one God. The Israelites would say daily, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." They would say that verbally. But we know from the time when, first century at least, we saw many Pharisees specifically saying they believed, but they could not show how they believed. He gives another example. Even the demons believe and tremble. What if Rahab said all those things? We see you guys, and we see how big you are, and we see this massive army about to surround the city. We know what you've already done to the other guys. And you destroyed them. Completely and utterly destroyed. We saw that. And we've heard of the things that happened in Israel. I mean, how could that not? We looked at that a few weeks ago. Of the locusts. But even still, some of the more supernatural ones, the light and the dark. We heard about those things. But I'm going to give you to the soldiers instead. That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to me logically. Why would, if you knew all these terrible things that happened to these other people by the one true God, as she says, and then you look at the little soldiers with their little spears. I mean, from that point of view, from that perspective, it's almost like you're seeing little toy soldiers. In my mind's eye, that's what I'm picturing. Is this one little city with these little pretend people moving around in it. And then the God of Israel, the God who has done all these wonderful, miraculous things, and I know that, and I'm still going to worry about the little people. That could hurt me. But what about God? What about the bigger picture? It wouldn't make sense. Why would she do that? Even the demons believe and tremble. So James says, you believe, okay, great. What of it? The demons, they believe and tremble as well. So that we've got the intellectual, you believe God, okay. That is necessary. Believing in God on an intellectual level is 100% necessary. You can't know God unless you know God of the Bible. But the emotional, the intellectual and emotional, let's combine those, he says. It's not enough just to have an emotion about your belief, because the demons do that. It doesn't matter what kind of emotion it is. It doesn't matter if it's a trembling fear, the way the demons or Rahab would have. Even we could argue that the other inhabitants of the land would say the same thing as what she said. Say for maybe the last little bit about the Lord of Israel is the one true God. They all knew about the things that had happened. And they trembled. They were faint-hearted. They had no courage. It's the same thing that's being said of the demons. And so it's not enough just to know God intellectually. It's not enough just to know God and have a fear like that or have another emotional response, happy, joy. It's got to be more than that. There's got to be works associated with it. We see her faith exhibited in all of those ways, the intellectual, the emotional, but we also see her faith exhibited in the evangelistic, of her telling about her family. Let me say, can we say to them too? You know, I did this thing, but I need them brought along with me. Rahab was a faithful woman. And we know she was faithful after this as well. She married a faithful Israelite man. And, well, like we said in Matthew 1, we read of Rahab in Jesus' family tree. She trusted in the promise of the spies. And we won't talk much more about this. I'm going to wrap up here because we're going to get into more of that action, that physical action of being faithful as a Christian to ensure our salvation next week. But we see her faith exhibited in that and that she stayed. In fact, she as soon as, when we read, we're not going to take the time right now, we'll look at it next week, but to summarize here, we see her as soon as she lets them out, they tell her to tie this ribbon on the window, and if you stay in, whoever is with you will be spared. She doesn't wait until they start marching around. She doesn't wait until the walls start trembling. She ties the ribbon around there before they even leave, hardly. She lets them down and ties the ribbon. She didn't wait. Neither can we. I imagine, most of us have been faithful. We've made that confession of faith, and we've put on Christ in baptism. And tying that scarlet ribbon, staying in the house, as we'll talk next week, have been faithful in those things. But have we been faithful in the other things that we're supposed to be doing? Have we been faithful in evangelizing? Being faithful in the good works of serving others as they need. I know that that's something that the congregation here does. Have you been faithful in telling your neighbor, your loved one, as Rahab was so eager to do, concerned for her family, for her father's house? She wanted to make sure they were not killed. And she was worried mostly about the physical death. What about our physical family's spiritual death? Are we being faithful in that? If not, why not? We looked at Paul and Apollos a couple weeks ago. We looked at Abraham. We looked at Rahab, who's got a less than stellar reputation and was faithful, and her acts were counted to her as righteousness. If you're not a Christian, why not? I mean, Rahab, was not a perfect person by any stretch, and found grace. You can too. You can find grace in Jesus by repenting of your sins and washing them away in baptism. The gospel invitation is open always. Won't you come as we stand and sing?